Good evening, good morning, good night, or good whatever you have where you are. I'm in Oslo, and I'm again so lucky as to have our dear friend, U.S. analyst and writer Charles Ortel with me online from what is left of New York City, I believe.
Very little at this point. We're in the middle of a torrential rainstorm now with freezing weather threatened in the coming days. So it was a mess before the rain, and it's even worse now.
Well, that's befitting, isn't it? Because today's show will be called Monkey Island, and we will explain that to the viewers after a while. And I'm also gonna tell them that you will be walking us through the Sea of Thieves in Washington, D.C. I will try to keep tally, but Charles, the floor is yours. Let's start with IRS, Biden's, Comer, and the whole shebang.
Certainly. I think it's very interesting, and thanks for having me back on. It's very interesting to look at contrasts, the contrast between light and darkness, to try to understand what's really going on. The dark side, we have the period from 2015 to the present, where Democrats and the corporate-owned media relentlessly spin the idea that Vladimir Putin controls Donald Trump's strings and the MAGA crowd, even though all aspects of that theory have been completely and utterly debunked by multiple outsiders, multiple Democrats. Nonetheless, Hillary Clinton recently spun a tale that she fears Putin. She's talking to Jen Psaki, the former press secretary, Biden's first press secretary. She fears that Vladimir Putin once again will interfere in the 2024 election. So with no evidence, with no reason to make such baseless claims, you spin all that. Then on the other side, in the Comer hearing yesterday, where in the run-up to the hearing, I think hundreds of pages of documents were released about the Biden corruption. And for most people who don't have the experience in finance, running investment funds, trying to put deals together, you'll look at all that and you'll say, well, it's just a bunch of deals, and so what if a family member is doing deals while the president, he's vice president and later president. But to somebody like me who has experience doing these sorts of things legitimately, the information that I saw the night before the hearing, and then in more depth yesterday and now today, about the Biden family getting involved, running a fund of hedge funds, buying a fund of hedge funds in 2006, that it was a good idea. We did that, my former business partner and I, we did that in 1995. That was an interesting idea back then. But to try to do it in 2006 on the small scale that they were doing, this is an entity called Paradigm something or other that they bought entirely with a promissory note. They didn't put up any cash to take control of a supposedly legitimate fund of hedge funds. And then Hunter and James Biden, who, just to be charitable to them, are complete bumbleheads. One is a cokehead and a bumblehead, and the other never graduated from college, which in of his generation, that's a little bit unusual to have somebody with no college degree, no graduate credentials of any time. That's Joe Biden's brother, James, getting involved in all these business deals. That does not happen in the real world. Ordinary mortals without political connections don't get involved in these type of deals. So to me, I see already mountains of evidence. But what happened yesterday is all the Democrats, they had met together. They decided that they would just, no matter what they saw, they just say there's no evidence, no reason to do this, even though they rushed into the first Trump impeachment and then the second Trump impeachment here with far more evidence, compelling evidence that the FBI knew the Biden family was rotten to the core. By 2019, before he was the candidate, they knew they had enough dirt, the FBI and the IRS and the Department of Justice, to put this family in prison forever. But they couldn't do that, my thesis is, because there are other dynastic political families that are also dirty. The Bush family, the Clinton family, and sadly, it seems, watching the Obamas and their foundation, they are succumbing to the temptation of operating in this unregulated globalist world a collection of speech, media, book, deal, investment, and other deals at the same time that they're playing politics, at the same time they're pretending to run a public charity, which you can't do all those three things normally, unless you have a corrupt IRS, a corrupt Justice Department, a corrupt Attorney General, and corrupt prosecutors, which it seems we do have in this country. So there's a lot of news breaking, and I can pick apart different pieces for people, but I think it was shameful what the Democrats tried to do. They had no counter arguments. So they tried to say, we shouldn't be spending any time on this because the government's going to shut down, which it will tomorrow. And this is just a waste of time when they've been wasting tremendous amounts of time on all kinds of fantasy projects where trillions of dollars have been borrowed and blown, going back really to the advent of unregulated globalism in 1989.
Question. One of the first things I heard on Norwegian Public Radio this morning was the fact that Biden had a very strong speech against Trump yesterday evening, it must have been. Is that, first of all, do you know who is his, or how many speechwriters does Bumbling Joe have?
Well, what he has, it's a rigged system. So as people, at Document will know, with a lot of media experience, if the sound people and the visual people want to make you look stupid, they can make you look stupid. If, on the other hand, they want to promote you and make you look good, and the handlers can restrict access, they can threaten the major media and say, listen, if you let Charles and Geyer come on CBS, you're never going to see Joe Biden again or anybody in the Biden administration. The CBS cannot take that risk. They need to have access to the president and the administration. So the incumbent administration has an enormous degree of power, particularly one like the Biden administration, which has shown it is willing, I think, to coordinate with allies in the various government prosecutorial offices to sic government resources against somebody, Donald Trump, who, if the current polls, the ABC poll, if it's to be believed, stands 10 points ahead of Joe Biden. I mean, if this is the kind of behavior that a normal U.S. president, if we saw this sort of stuff going on that is actually happening in the United States right now, an honest American regime would impose sanctions against a country doing this kind of stuff, because it's repugnant to our Constitution, our tradition, to prop up somebody who seems to be very corrupt, has a family that only knows how to be corrupt, to prop him up to lie and impede investigations, while at the same time you're using state, local, and federal resources to persecute Trump and his family, is tin pot banana dictator stuff. And I think the ordinary human being understands this. I think, in fact, the very people that Biden believes are his allies, the minorities, African Americans, who've seen justice in this country be administered unfairly in their view against them, they look at what the Biden administration is doing to Trump, and a big slice of them, bigger than the Bidens believe, it finds this horrible, and is, I think, in the end, if Trump survives, is going to support him.
Charles, this is to a lot of viewers who worldwide who have not been able to follow the news or have only followed the mainstream media. This ought to be shocking news. So I'd like to ask you, how would you put this last speech of Biden, never mind who wrote it, please put it into context. Isn't he going to be thrown under the bus? I mean, we sort of agreed that he was not going to be the Democratic presidential candidate next year. So what is happening here?
Well, I think there's a pitched battle going on. The Democrats understand. The Democrats in general are better tacticians than Republicans. They're street fighters, the operatives around the Democrats. And I think most of the Republicans are not. They're basically not people you'd really want fighting for you. In a street fight. And so the Democrat money understands that if Joe Biden is the only candidate in these primaries, there is a high percentage probability that he won't survive physically during the next election season. I mean, the trajectory of his decline, his mental and physical decline, is obvious to see. And I'm not a medical person, but I can see it. And you hear experienced people, Ronnie Jackson, who was the White House Surgeon General, whatever you call him, the White House doctor who took care of Obama and took care of Trump. He's now in Congress representing a district in Texas, and he's been saying for years that Joe Biden is not fit mentally or physically. So the money understands that you're going to have to put a lot of money behind this primary contest, not knowing whether or not your preferred candidate is going to win. Second thing the money understands is that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is likely to mount a third-party campaign. And if that happens, then assuming Trump is the nominee, Trump will win a landslide victory. So the money behind the Democrats is desperately, in my opinion, trying to get Joe out, trying to find a way through this mess, maybe have Joe pardon his family and himself, and then be toxic so he can't run. And Hillary knows this, and the Obama team knows this, and others know this, and they see a gigantic power vacuum and a potential opportunity to have a very short election period where they can mount another basement level campaign, which seemed to work for Joe Biden, and hope that they don't get demolished next November. But I think every day Joe Biden reliably does something remarkably stupid and dangerous. And there are very few people who could say, this guy's doing a good job at this point. Very few people who can say that legitimately.
And right before we started this recording, because unfortunately it is a recording, and that is due to the fact that we're a poor, independent news media house outlet. So we have to do with whatever means we have. Thus, if you have any money to spare, you can please support our work by donating through PayPal at document.no, and don't forget, please, to support Charles Urchel's and Jason Goodman's work on Crowdsource the Truth. All the information you will find in the body of the article for this program. And then back to my next question, Charles. Is Biden, or you were speaking about Biden, and somebody like Mrs. Clinton is positioning her for possibly taking the vacant seat? Is that her dream, you think?
Well, yes, and that's why I have this cap on but her frauds. We have the recent development, really, in the last 24 hours, of an elected judge. I think having judges be elected is a very bad idea, but an elected judge here in New York has issued an order which Trump correctly refers to as a corporate assassination. Here you have the Trump organization. Donald Trump, I think, is the second or third generation to be doing real estate in New York State and now internationally. This judge allowed a civil lawsuit by the Attorney General of the state of New York to proceed against the Trump family and issued an order, even though no bank was concerned about the valuation, and even though all the loans have been paid currently and repaid the principal. This judge sided with the Attorney General, who I'm not a lawyer, but I would argue does not have standing to do what she's done. And the judge has ordered that the Trump vehicles that own a lot of real estate with debt attached to it in New York be dissolved immediately. And she thinks Tish James is her name. She campaigned on a platform that was to persecute the Trump family. And this is behavior, again, that if we saw this in Norway, if we saw this in a developing country, an honest administration would say, no, wait a minute, this is behavior we cannot tolerate. You can't have one band of partisans come with what you call trumped up charges and proceed down a path which actually, if they do this and if the Trump vehicles are dissolved, what this will do is create a financial crisis worse than the Great Depression, because in New York City and state, one of the remaining reasons to do business here is our legal precedents are pretty good, save for this one. This is a horrific precedent. This will say that no matter what you agree in private as to how much you want to lend and how much you want to borrow and the terms of the loan, some judge, some politician can look at that arrangement and say, we don't like it. You know, we're experts here in New York. We're going to say that you've overvalued Mar-a-Lago, which is what the judge said. How does he know? You know, he has no clue what he's talking about. And so this is a very dangerous decision to assassinate a for-profit empire in New York, while at the same time letting the Clinton Foundation escape any type of scrutiny. The Clinton Foundation began operations in New York soliciting funds illegally in 1998. It has never filed a 1997 tax return, which it had to file. It's actually called an informational return, but they've never filed it, which means all subsequent returns are wrong. And they never registered, even though Hillary was a sitting senator beginning January 3rd, 2001, they never registered in New York, even though she represented New York, to operate the Clinton Foundation itself lawfully until an attempt was made in 2009. So for 8 years in New York, they didn't have audits. They need to have tight audits under New York law. New York law is on the books, very strict, as you see how they're treating Trump. In the not-for-profit world, it's even stricter. You know, they're smart enough in New York to say all audits are not created equal, and if you want to operate a charity soliciting money in New York, you have to get a real audit from an independent auditor, and it has to apply American accounting standards rigorously. And it sets forth in the regulations what you have to do. Clintons have never done that. The Clinton Foundations have never done that. They've never had their legal paperwork in order. And here she's chuckling with Jen Psaki and gloating and issuing these statements and teeing herself up to raid the relief funds that are going into Ukraine, while at the same time, Trump and his organization that have created hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of tax revenue for the city and state of New York over generations. Here's a New York family being persecuted by a New York judge and a fake New York family, the Clintons, destroying the not-for-profit industry inside the state and inside this country by their continued operation of a slew of fake charities that have never reported properly, and which the Clinton family and the main charities control illegally by operation of bylaws. You're not allowed to do that, but they're doing it, and the Democratic administration of the city and state and the country refuse to do anything about it. It's outrageous.
Charles, right before we went into the studio, you sent me an article where you said it's maybe old news because it refers to a decision made back in May of this year. Please walk us through that one.
Well, there are two intrepid whistleblowers who appeared before Congress in 1998, in December of 1998, several days after the FBI interviewed me to try to tie me into the Mueller mess, which they did not successfully do. But these gentlemen, Larry Doyle and John Moynihan, testified before Mark Meadows and the Oversight Committee that they had gone to the IRS with thousands of pages of incriminating evidence. The IRS had said they were going to look into it, and then with no good explanation said, nah, we're not doing it, i.e. they probably, somebody at the IRS said,
thousands of pages of incriminating evidence against the Clinton Foundation?
Not just the Clinton Foundation, donors to the Clinton Foundation and other crooked charities. So here we are in this country. Biden is bragging about how he trims the deficit down. The government deficit for this year that ends tomorrow is going to be around $2 trillion, meaning we borrowed $2 trillion more than we spent $2 trillion more than we had in tax revenue. And investors, gullible investors, I would argue, around the world said, okay, we'll lend you more money. So just at a time and in a period where this country, the politicians of both parties cannot get our financial house in order, where we have a golden opportunity to raise revenue by just simply no new laws need to be enacted. The laws, regulations are on the books. You could start in a high tax place like New York or California or Washington, D.C., and you could take these crooked charities and you could bring them to heel. Now, there's no statute of limitations, I'm told by lawyers, protecting this ancient problem at the Clinton Foundation. And so anyway, they went before Congress, they explained that, and I'm not sure the exact dates, but they launched an action against the IRS, basically saying you're not doing your job properly, and we need you to go and enforce the laws and collect the taxes. The penalties for what the Clintons have done, going way back, difficult to say how they will be calculated, but if a strict interpretation of the regulations, the laws, and the precedents are that billions of dollars of fines could be imposed on donors, on the Clintons, the trustees, et cetera. In this case, these two whistleblowers have been pursuing. It is under seal, so I do not know the details. There's a certain portion, the orders are public. I haven't seen the evidence. I haven't seen the case. I do know both gentlemen. And this case proceeds. The IRS has tried to stop it many different ways and has not been able to stop it. And something could and should develop. In addition, the Clinton Foundation and other charities have to report by November 15th of this year what happened last year. And all of their reports that are out there are materially false and misleading. So they just are demonstrating by a pattern, knowing that there's a problem, they refuse to correct it. All I would argue they're doing is demonstrating their unfitness to hold office. The very penalty that this judge is exacting against the Trumps unfairly should fairly be enacted against the Clinton family and other dynastic families, political families like the Bidens, like the Bushes, who continue to operate public charities in violation of the law.
It seems to me that, or I can ask you, do you think that there will be any movement on these issues in the foreseeable future? I mean, is it going to have an impact on Biden's destiny? I mean, Hillary Clinton's possible candidacy must be toxic by most people by now, don't you think?
Well, again, the people who shape public opinion, the folks at Google who manipulate the search results, the very few people who decide who gets kicked off of YouTube and who doesn't, the people who decide who gets on the mainstream media platforms and can then shape public opinion, those people may not necessarily be in for Clinton, but they're definitely in for keeping progressives and Democrats in power. So that's why I say the money behind all this is feverishly in search of a lead actor who can be in the primary play that starts in January. That person is not Joe Biden, in my view. And it may be Hillary Clinton, but Ted Cruz and others and we, I think, have early months ago talked about the idea that maybe Michelle Obama will be drafted by the Democrats. And of all the candidates who are out there, I'm not saying I support Michelle Obama, she would be a very tough contender for a Donald Trump or another person to take on in the general election next year. So I suspect she will be drafted, and she will reluctantly accede to the calls from the Democratic loyalists to say, listen, you have to save the country. We can't let Trump topple law and order and end democracy. You have to rise up. And there'll be calls around the world. This is great. The first female American president. She happens to be black. This is fantastic. The Cam Pie, as Rush Limbaugh likes to talk about him, the various Ivy League universities and private colleges will be just dancing in the streets. They'll come out in droves. And it'll be tougher for Trump to do what he did to Hillary, because he's very effective, I think, Donald Trump, in debating. It'll be very tough for him to do the same thing against Michelle. So I think that may be an undercurrent that's going on right now.
Lock her up won't work on Michelle Obama, but and I'm not sure that if, hypothetically, Michelle Obama was to be drafted, as you say, her possible slogan of "Give us a second chance" wouldn't work that well either, would it?
Well, they'll come up with something. I mean, they have all kinds of media coaches, and they'll come up with a story. I mean, they'll be able to schmaltz it up. And remember, the population is aging in this country, and there are a lot of older people who, their last major election, might say, that we still haven't done enough for the African Americans in this country. We have our legacy that we need to atone for. And you may just see a groundswell of support for her, assuming RFK doesn't run. If RFK runs as an independent, she should not run, because she will be slaughtered if she runs.
Dear audience, you're looking at a man who has more knowledge than all of the MSM in Norway put together, and half of the MSM in the States, maybe all of them too. He's a living encyclopedia, and I'm trying to keep abreast with all the news you put out, Charles, through mail mainly, but also don't forget, folks, he has his own Twitter account. The smartest thing you can do to know at least a little bit of what's going on in the U.S. without being tainted by some schmuck in the MSM is to subscribe to Charles Ertel's Twitter account. For God's sake, you're stupid if you don't. And I don't think we have stupid ears. Charles, one of the stories that you said during the last week was something about they made some discoveries about Black Lives Matters. Some funds were. Can you walk us through that one too?
Sure. There's a man. I actually was in Bristol, England, for the first time in August, and I've an ancient family member who came from Bristol into Virginia in 1700s, and when you go there, you learn a lot of things I did not know, and one of them is there's a man called Edward Colston, Colston, who, for his, to be on the wrong side of history, he was very actively involved, actually, with the royal family of England at the time, in the Royal Africa Company, or African Company, which was trafficking slaves, and of course that's horrible. He had second thoughts about it, and he spent the balance of his life as a philanthropist and gave away a tremendous amount of money in modern terms. So there's statues to him all over town. And when the Black Lives Matters riots were going on inside the U.S., they spread to Bristol. And a number of people got together and took Edward Colston's statue and knocked it to the ground. Having done that, one of these people created a fake charity and promised that donations sent to the charity would be used to help young Bristolians, Black ones, visit Africa. Instead of doing that, this person stole all the money. And, it really is, it's sad to see that, because Black Lives Matter is a massive fraud, technically, all over the world. It has not been registered lawfully anywhere. A lot of money went towards it, in theory, and a lot of that money has disappeared. And this illustrates a crux of the problem. There are lots of generous souls who hear about problems. Now with the internet, you can send your money to all sorts of causes. And people are adept, fraudsters are adept, like the Clintons, at describing unspeakable tragedy that's happening in Ukraine. And we can back up and ask ourselves, why is it happening and who's responsible for it? But there's this tragedy, send money, and so money comes pouring in. There are 8 billion people on the planet. There are a lot of people who can part with $5 or even $100. That money courses towards these causes, and some people steal the money before it gets to the charity. Others steal it once it's in the charity and it's sent out in grants. And there is no global police force. There's nobody capable of figuring out, is there a real charity in Ukraine? that actually is doing what the Clintons say they're going to do with the money that the governments are going to give the Clinton Foundation. There isn't, as a guess. And there certainly isn't across Africa. So there's a lot of tragedy. And if we were trying to unite the world around a common cause, it would seem to me to be you need to protect the vulnerable. People who give to these foreign ideas are in the main naive and need to be protected by people who are experienced looking through financial statements and are cynical about what people tell you, and go and double check for the benefit of the donor, for the benefit of the endeavor. I mean, giving money away selflessly is a very nice thing to do and should be encouraged. But instead, by these corrupt acts led by our dynastic political families around the world, we're making a mockery of the system, and there needs to be reform.
Definitely. Charles, I think one of the best investments people can do this weekend is to visit your Twitter account, watch your latest shows with Jason, maybe go back and watch some of our old shows. But first and foremost, they need to invest in their own children and grandchildren. Read them a good classical book. Don't buy that adventure game Monkey Island, because Monkey Island is still going on. You just haven't realized it yet. So much better, read a good book, sing a song for your grandchild or for your child's. Go to a choir. I mean, do something with other people. Leave your phone back home. Get out in the fresh air and enjoy life. That's the most important thing of all, isn't it, Charles? And soon, a couple of months, you will be back in Norway, and we will have some fun also with our viewers, I hope. But in the meantime, we shall try to put you back on next week. Thank you for coming again. It's always great to have you. Have a nice weekend, people. Thank you.